Workers at the damaged Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant are continuing efforts to remove highly radioactive water from parts of the facility. Highly contaminated water needs to be transferred to the plant's waste processing facility from the basement of the No. 2 reactor's turbine building before workers can continue efforts to restore the cooling system. On Wednesday, workers checked the waste processing facility to make sure it could hold the contaminated water to be transferred. Work also continued to transfer contaminated water from an underground utility tunnel outside the No. 2 reactor to a turbine condenser. Tokyo Electric Power Company says the water level in the tunnel was nearly 1 meter below the ground surface as of Wednesday morning, dropping 8 centimeters from the previous day. On Tuesday last week, workers stopped leakage into the sea of highly radioactive water from a concrete pit near the underground tunnel. Another challenge is how to stop the spread of radioactive material in the sea. Seawater sampled on Monday 30 kilometers offshore contained 2.2 times the national safety limit of radioactive iodine-131. The level 15 kilometers offshore was 23 times the limit. Both figures were the highest yet observed. On Wednesday, workers put up underwater barriers in the sea near water intakes at the No. 2, No. 3, and No. 4 reactors. The barriers are to be reinforced in the coming days.
Japan's Science Ministry says radioactive substances will continue to diffuse to the northeast in the Pacific Ocean for several days after being released from the troubled nuclear power plant. The ministry conducted a computer-simulated prediction of movements of such substances based on seawater survey as well as data on current in nearby waters. On April 2nd, levels of radioactive iodine-131 near the water intake of the plant's No. 2 reactor were found to be 7.5 million times higher than the legal limit. The ministry says the radiation levels are on the decline but remain high. The ministry's short-term prediction says the substances will spread from the coast to the northeast, maintaining their levels for several days. The ministry's long-term prediction says the substances will be carried south by a current 100 kilometers offshore in lowered concentrations, then move east with a rapidly moving current of Ibaraki Prefecture in about a month. The ministry said the concentration of radioactive substances in the sea is likely to decrease gradually. The ministry plans to step up monitoring of the movements of radioactive substances in waters around the plant and release another prediction.
Tokyo Electric Power Company is considering making temporary damage payments to residents around the plant. President Masataka Shimizu of TEPCO made this known at a news conference on Wednesday. Shimizu said he sincerely apologizes to the residents as well as the people of Fukushima Prefecture and other areas for the tremendous trouble and worries caused by the serious accident involving leakage of radioactive materials. He said TEPCO is consulting the government to prepare to address the issue of compensating local residents based on a law for nuclear damage compensation. Shimizu also said TEPCO is in the final stages of creating a roadmap to stabilize the power plant and that the firm hopes to announce measures to do so quickly. TEPCO plans to restart the No. 3 reactor at the Kashiwazaki-Kariwa nuclear plant in Niigata Prefecture by the end of this year. The plant's No. 2 through No. 4 reactors have been out of service since the March 11th disaster. TEPCO President Shimizu said on Wednesday that the company has been reinforcing quake resistance at the No. 3 reactor so that it can resume operation as soon as possible. Shimizu also said TEPCO must review its strategy on selling nuclear plants overseas and shift its management resources toward ending the Fukushima crisis and resolving compensation issues.
A top U.S. military commander says the United States is sharing photos and surveillance data on the crippled nuclear power plant with Japan and other countries. The chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, Admiral Robert Willard, told the Senate Armed Services Committee on Tuesday that unmanned surveillance aircraft are monitoring the plant every day. Willard said the aircraft are recording temperature fluctuations near the nuclear reactors and taking photographs. He also said the military is creating maps of radiation levels near the compound based on data from sensors aboard the aircraft. The admiral said 150 members of a special U.S. unit trained to deal with nuclear-related disasters are working with the Japanese self-defense forces near the Fukushima compound. About 1,500 U.S. Marines returned on Tuesday to Okinawa Prefecture, southern Japan, where they are stationed, concluding a mission to assist relief efforts in the Pacific coastal areas of northeastern Japan hit by the massive earthquake and tsunami on March 11th. Under Operation Tomodachi or Operation Friend, the United States conducted a mission of an unprecedented scale, dispatching 18,000 troops, an aircraft carrier, and 140 planes to the disaster-hit region. A month after the disaster, most of the units are now pulling out of the areas. In today's angle, we hear the view of Yoshihide Soya, a professor of political science at Keio University, about the U.S. mission in Japan. Now, Professor Soya, what impact has the large-scale relief mission by the U.S. had on Japan-U.S. relations?
主に2つあったと思うんですが、一つは、被災者の
The mission had two phases. The first was to search for survivors of the disaster and carry out rescue operations, as well as look for the remains of victims. The second was to provide assistance in ongoing efforts to bring the troubled power plant under control. The two phases cover an entirely different set of problems, but the U.S. has actively provided support by fully utilizing its position as a major ally of Japan and its military bases in the country. By witnessing this massive relief assistance, we, the Japanese people, have recognized that the role of the U.S. bases in Japan is not limited to military affairs, which has long been the root of public anxiety. I think that Japanese have come to hold a favorable view of the Japan-U.S. alliance as a result. The Japanese self-defense forces have repeatedly held joint drills with the U.S. military, including those to improve coordination in the event of contingencies. This provided valuable experience in carrying out relief efforts in the aftermath of the latest disaster. The joint relief efforts this time also helped to further enhance cooperation between the two forces.
The accident at the Fukushima Daiichi plant is now being classified as the world's worst nuclear power plant disaster in history. What will be the focus of future Japan-U.S. cooperation?
Japan and the U.S. have so far failed to share information about the accident and resulting radiation contamination, and the U.S. has informally conveyed its frustration over this to Japan. The Japanese government has failed to recognize that the accident is not only a domestic crisis, but also a global one, sparking intense concern among the international community. It's a problem that the government has yet to take responsibility, together with the plant operator, Tokyo Electric Power Company, to come up with a unified system to gather, analyze, and disclose necessary information to the public at home and abroad. Public opposition to nuclear power generation will inevitably gain momentum around the world, but the reality is that the energy policies of the U.S. and many other countries are inextricably linked to nuclear power. At issue is how countries deal with these incompatible elements. There will be international moves to seek a viable model of nuclear power generation and a new framework to allow it. Japan and the U.S. will likely cooperate in addressing the issue based on a mutual perspective.
Today we talked to Yoshihide Soya, professor of political science at Keio University, about the U.S. relief mission in Japan.
You're listening to NHK World Radio Japan in Tokyo. More than 28,000 people are dead or missing after the March 11th disaster and recent aftershocks in eastern Japan. According to the National Police Agency, the deaths of 13,392 people have so far been confirmed. Most of the deaths occurred in Miyagi, Iwate, and Fukushima, the three hardest-stricken prefectures. Miyagi topped the list at 8,190, followed by Iwate at 3,867 and Fukushima at 1,272. About 83%, or 11,156 of the recovered bodies, have been identified and handed over or are being handed over to the victims' families. The agency lists 15,133 people as unaccounted for, based on reports mostly from family members. On Wednesday, police announced for the first time that 776 are missing in Higashi Matsushima, one of the most heavily flooded cities in Miyagi. The announcement was delayed due to the effort to sort out possible overlapping cases. Police have yet to announce the total number of missing in Sendai, the capital city of Miyagi. The National Police Agency says about 140,000 people are living in emergency shelters, mostly in Miyagi, Iwate, and Fukushima. Another 22,000 people have evacuated to areas outside the three prefectures. According to the Health, Labor, and Welfare Ministry, 300,000 households in 8 prefectures remain without water. The ministry has sent water trucks to the affected areas.
Ambassadors and their spouses from countries in Central and South America, Middle East and South Asia visited an evacuation center in Fukushima Prefecture affected by a nuclear accident induced by March 11th earthquake and tsunami. Ambassadors and their spouses from 11 countries, including Pakistan, Mexico and Colombia, visited a shelter in Kodiyama City on Wednesday. The shelter is accommodating about 2,000 people from Tomioka Town and Kawauchi Village, instructed to evacuate or to stay indoors following the nuclear accident. They brought water, fruits and other aid supplies. They talked to people at the evacuation center and gave handmade dolls clad in traditional costumes to children. The ambassadors said they want to convey their wish to continue providing support to Japan. The wife of Mexican ambassador to Japan, Marta Espinosa, said, as a woman and mother, she feels the hardship of quake survivors. She said she has continued to pray since the day the massive earthquake occurred, and she will continue to think of what she can do to help from now on, too.
Egyptian prosecutors have detained former President Hosni Mubarak and his 2 sons for inquiries into the allegations of corruption and abuse of authority. The Prosecutor General's office on Wednesday announced that Mubarak and his sons, Gamal and Alaa, will be moved from the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, where they are staying, to the capital Cairo for a 15-day detention and inquiries. His sons served as senior officials of the governing party. The prosecution says that for the time being it will question Mubarak at a hospital in the resort, where he has been treated for heart problems since Tuesday. The ousted president and his sons are suspected of authorizing the killing of anti-Mubarak protesters in a civic uprising that lasted for 3 weeks, from January until his resignation in early February. A series of protests have been staged in the country recently, demanding investigations into Mubarak's alleged involvement in corruption during his 30 years in office. Some casualties were reported in a clash between troops and protesters last Friday. In a statement issued on Sunday, Mubarak pleads his innocence and promises to cooperate in the investigation. Many Egyptians have welcomed the detention of Mubarak and his sons. A 36-year-old man participating in a protest told NHK that their detentions have been long awaited. He said he hopes prosecutors will bring them to justice and hold them accountable for their allegations as soon as possible and recover the assets the former leader robbed from the people. A 23-year-old woman said the apprehension of a former president demonstrates fairness and democracy are being exercised in her country.